Welcome to Imposter Hour with Liz and Greg. We're here to explore the imposter syndrome that haunts creatives, delving into how it affects their lives and work. Join us as we chat with authors and artists about creativity, self-doubt, featuring imposter characters in their stories, and the occasional imposter who pops up in their day-to-day lives.
Today, we have the great pleasure of welcoming Rennie Dyball to the show. Rennie is an award-winning author, ghostwriter, and editor who works in many genres, including picture books, middle-grade fiction, and prescriptive nonfiction. Her latest title, a children's picture book called Fiona and the Peculiar Praise, came out in hardcover in May, and her next project, the ADHD Field Guide for Adults, will be published by Gallery in March of 2026. She's got several works in progress, including her first foray into contemporary romance. Rennie is a competitive equestrian and a mom of two, and she lives in Maryland with her family. Rennie, welcome.
Thank you. It's so good to see you both.
You as well.
So great to have you. As always, just to give a little bit of context, Rennie, we all know each other, but you and I have known each other, I figured out, since 2012, so over a decade. Yeah. When back in my in-house days, when I was publicity director at Plume, and you co-wrote a wonderful memoir with Tiffany DiDonato called Dwarf, which was an incredible book. And we just got to connect with that project. And then, of course, I knew you from working at People magazine, but you've been, a long time touchstone person just to commiserate about writing and the industry. And it's been incredible to see all of the ways in which you've, grown and evolved your writing career. So you are like a writing chameleon. You've written so many different kinds of books. I guess my first question for you would be, do you feel imposter syndrome in crossing genres? Do you feel it just in general with writing? Like, where does it turn up for you, flare up, if at all? I don't want to assume.
No, you can absolutely assume. And it flares up every time I make a change, which has been often in my career. I started out at People, like you said, before you and I met. I got my first ghostwriting project from an imprint that had already signed a celebrity. They had signed Cristiano. He just had won Project Runway. They needed a ghostwriter, and they saw an article I did for People, and they really liked the tone and the voice. And they said, are you interested in doing any ghostwriting? And, my motto is to always say yes and then figure it out. So, I said yes. And then I ran into my colleague, Alex Tresnowski's office. He's an author as well. And I said, there's 50,000 words. I can't write 50,000 words, coming from People where an in-depth feature was maybe 1,000 words. It just seemed insurmountable. But he was a great first mentor. And that first edit letter, I remember, flared up the imposter syndrome big time because, the first draft, it was a rush. They needed it in 6 weeks. And there was a lot of work to do, to be expected. But, for a first timer, I thought, oh, I was right all along. Can't do this. And then, more and more nonfiction projects came while I was at People. After I left People, nonfiction got pretty comfortable. Then I moved into writing for children, middle grade fiction. And, she hopped back in the room with me, imposter syndrome. Like, you can't do this. What are you thinking? I'd always write fiction, but hadn't really, had the opportunity at the time with a full-time job. So it really flares up every time I make a change, but I've learned to stop fighting it. I've learned to expect it to show up. I keep calling it her. It's almost like a friend who, is part of your brain telling you can't do it, and you got to kind of argue back and forth. And, she's a part of life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What is the sort of, I guess, counterpoint or the flip side of that then? If the imposter syndrome is coming in anytime you kind of make that jump, is there sort of an invigorating quality to moving into something that's the unknown? Does it sort of energize you creatively? Like, how does that sort of balance out, I guess, for you?
Yeah, definitely. I always like to, first of all, counter the, what if you can't do it with, well, what if you can? And what if this move ends up being the niche that you feel good in and want to stay in for the next however many years. So I've really learned to counter the what ifs with a more positive what if.
Yeah.
But yes, super invigorating to move among genres. And really, I think that sort of the order in which I've done things has been, for me personally, least scary to most scary. While word count in prescriptive nonfiction was intimidating when I first started, I'd always been a nonfiction writer. So moving from magazine form, longer form print to books was natural. And then my foray into fiction, those novels were on the shorter side. It was an equestrian series. I've been an equestrian my whole life. So, you write what you know, but each step has gotten progressively scarier leading up to working on my first manuscript that's contemporary romance. It's my first novel for adults, period. And I did it because I had, a great idea and something I was it lit me up, the idea to write about this. But it's definitely the scariest yet. So that invigoration, I guess, is what keeps it moving and what keeps you doing it, even though it's scary and you feel like, what if I can't?
I'm so curious, with your first foray into writing adult fiction and then writing genre adult fiction. I mean, I feel like romance in the hierarchy of like genre readers, kind of pickiness and standards.
Yes.
Especially now, I mean, in the age of Colleen Hoover and, lots of other romance novelists who I won't be able to name because this is not an area of literature that I feel particularly confident, in knowing the authors. But what I do know from having done romance conventions and conferences over the years as a publicist is that, like, wow, romance readers, I think, head and shoulders over thriller and mystery readers, like, buy just everything an author they like writes. They follow characters through multiple book series. They are incredibly tight knit as a group, and I think, they do have really high standards. You read any Goodreads reviews, you can see that. So I think you're really brave and I applaud you and I know you can do it. And what I'm wondering is, with all of these different genres that you've written in, especially with ghostwriting, where you really have to kind of adapt and become the voice of the person you're writing for or about. How was it for you to sit down and be like, well, I have this great idea, but like, what's my voice? Like, you've gotten so used to writing in a certain tone, even for picture books or middle grade.
Sure. Yeah, that's really interesting. As you were describing ghostwriting, it occurred to me that being a collaborative writer or a co-author or a ghostwriter is sort of the ultimate flex in imposter syndrome, right? Like, it's not about me. I've had writer friends tell me, oh, I could never do that. Like, I'd want my name on the cover or I'd want it to be my book. And I've just never seen it that way. It's just something else. It's like going for a run versus taking, I don't know, a spin class. Like, it's just two completely different things to me. And so capturing someone else's voice honestly comes very naturally to me. It's very easy. However, with the practice stories, I would call them, that I've written, and sort of the attempts at fiction that I've done previously, I've always been told that the voice part of it was strong. So, that's the beauty of like an editor who builds you up, right? Or a mentor who makes you feel good about yourself. So I was just able to kind of tell myself, all right, you got the voice part down. Let's, flesh out this character. Like, I want to make sure this character's likable. Am I getting to, put from point A to point B fast enough in my story arc? It's the construction more of an adult title in fiction that trips me up. The pacing, my least favorite thing to hear in publishing is show, don't tell, because it's used over and over to the point that I actually found that sometimes, like, when you're mired in an edit, I like lose sight of what it even means. You know, like I'll read a passage and be like, well, I am showing what do they mean by that? You know?
Yeah.
And I hired this freelance editor, Meg Rosenthal. She's wonderful, who read an earlier draft of my romance novel. And she just put it in different words that I'd love to share with you and your listeners.
Yeah.
Because I come from nonfiction, I'm used to writing in a certain style that I need to undo for fiction. So what she told me that I need to tattoo on my body somewhere is scene over summary. That's my problem, is that I tend to, if I want to move my plot along, I just start summarizing. And that's telling, as opposed to showing, which would be, you know, instead of summarizing this like phone call that my main character had, I'll show the reader. She'll have the phone call in the scene, and I'll find a way within the dialogue or whatever else is going on to make it interesting enough to be a scene, right? And then the reader won't want you to skip over it in summary, but scene over summary was a big game changer for me.
That's awesome. Yeah. Thank you.
I'm curious a little bit. You're starting to touch on it a little bit in terms of, you know, moving over to between genres, and each genre, of course, has, you know, different kind of demands or different, they're kind of maybe different skill sets. On one hand, I have to imagine just cumulatively, you're kind of building your skill set as you write further in, no matter what it is. But when you go into, let's say, a genre that you haven't tackled before, do you have a particular kind of, you know, will you go in and kind of give yourself a syllabus in terms of like, you know, really reading heavy in that genre, or do you find that you're able to kind of, you know, move certain kind of things from one genre to the next fairly organically?
Yeah, I was very dumb at first when I had this idea. I knew it was a love story, and I knew it would have a happily ever after, which are requirements for romance, but there's obviously a whole lot more than that.
Right.
And I thought, you know what? I don't read a ton of romance. I actually read a lot more thriller and book. But I was like, you know, I've read enough romance. I'm just going to dive into my first draft. And it was very, very flawed, fatally flawed, because I didn't know enough about what readers want in genre fiction, about the tropes even, you know, like I kind of went there, but I didn't have enough. So for me, it was more like, you know, I think it's Anne Lamott who says you have to have the shitty first draft. This was like a horrific first draft. And then I was like, okay, let's take a step back, you know, find romance within romance that I like, really read up on that, you know, understand the rhythms and the tropes better.
Yeah.
And then I revisited, you know, changed a ton. I mean, the plot has changed like 47 times. I naively didn't understand when novelists talked about just writing, just getting it to a place where you're giving it to an editor would take a year or 2 years. I mean, I naively didn't understand why, and now I'm in it. I get it. I'm on draft, you know, 64 or something.
Well, it's also like, I'm thinking about your like plate of projects, and you've written, you know, just in the bio we mentioned, you have this wonderful picture book that I've read to my son a bunch of times, which is so great. I can't recommend it highly enough. And then you have this, you know, serious nonfiction that you've co-written about adult ADHD, which is like so needed. I feel like there's a prevalence of diagnosis right now with people with ADD and ADHD. So I think it's probably a brilliant book to be having come out early next year, but those are very different books. So when you're kind of organizing like your creative calendar and your brain, like what's your pie chart look like? Are you like, okay, I've got the romance novel that's like constantly living there in its 63rd, 64th draft, and then I can like also do a children's book and then also do a co-written nonfiction? Like, tell us about that.
Every day is a little bit different. Any book that I'm ghostwriting or co-writing is largely dependent on the other author's schedule. So right now, for example, I'm writing a memoir / prescriptive with a really cool Paralympian. And so I work around his training schedule. So it's sort of not my choice when I'm dipping into that one. And then I'm working with a non-diet dietitian. Her name's Sam Previtt. Her brand is Find Food Freedom. Liz, this would be right up your alley.
Yeah.
Really cool prescriptive nonfiction book there. Again, I'm working around her schedule. So what I've learned to do with my own work that has been a real game changer, and I read this somewhere, I wish I could tell you who said it. It might be the agent Kate McKeon, who just released a book. She's also an author. Her book, Right Through It. I believe it was her. And she said that you should get comfortable opening your laptop or sitting at your desk at any time that you have a window in your day, whether you're writing, editing. So that's what I've been doing right now. Like I glance at the clock and I'm like, I've got 45 minutes before the kids come home. Okay. So I put the phone on Do Not Disturb. I might even set an alarm for 45 minutes. And no matter where I am in the house, I write in the car sometimes. I'll just open it up and go. And that was such game-changing advice for me, because I used to have to be in certain rooms in my house to put, the writing for myself hat on. But practicing doing it from many different places really changed things. And so now my days are just totally frenetic, honestly. I mean, I'll wake up before the kids and I'll work on, edits on a proposal for a co-written project. The kids wake up, I do the kids thing, the kids leave, I've got an hour. All right, now I'm going to put the romance brain on, and that switch is not super hard, maybe because I worked in magazines and at people.com for so many years, and it was so fast that you just had to switch, and it wasn't really something you thought about. So yeah, it's every day is just a total mixed bag.
Has changing up the way that you work and the way you kind of slot in work time, has that changed at all the way your kind of creative brain works when you're sort of off the clock, so to speak, in terms of the way maybe ideas come or inspiration or story?
I think ideas for a project in the works or a new project, a new story idea, I think they come to me at all different times now, when it didn't really used to be that way. And I think I've gotten a lot more comfortable, and I crave the quiet. It used to be that when I got in the car, I had to immediately turn on podcast or an Audible, someone had to be talking to me in my brain. And now, if I'm driving to the barn, I have nothing on in the car. And I just want to see what floats in. And some days it's going to be absolutely nothing, but it might be the frenetic pace and nature of the workday that when I have those quiet times, I just let it be quiet and I see what happens.
Yeah.
Well, I want to talk about horses and your equestrianism and, relation to, who you are, because you've been doing this for a very long time. But also, I have to imagine, there's a certain meditative quality that you're brought to when you're riding. And do you find that to be the case? And is that a place where you can kind of have that, creative consciousness, that flow state?
Yeah, absolutely. Being on a horse is the only time or place in my life where nothing is rattling around. To be a good rider, you have to be just completely present and feeling everything going on underneath you and reacting to everything going on around you. So, if brains had an on-off switch, that is the only time that I get to flip it off. Obviously, it's on in another way, but it is just the most refreshing and rejuvenating part of my life, to the point that, on a drive home from the barn, actually, come to think of it, is when a lot of the great ideas come, because you know what I mean? It's like turning the computer off and turning it back on again. And, whatever was not working so well in there and causing problems is just gone. You just get a fresh start. And I also think that there's something about being a creative person and having a relationship with a living being that doesn't talk, and that you have to communicate with them with no word. My life is words. My husband calls me Rennie, editor of everything, not lovingly. He doesn't love that. you know, my mom is always like, oh, you should have been a lawyer. Like, you can talk your way out of it. You know, my whole life is words. So I actually didn't put this together till you said it. It was a great question. Um, I think that's part of what's so refreshing with horses is that there's no words. Not that I don't talk to my horse,
Mm.
um, but to
Yeah.
communicate with him, he doesn't understand a single word out of my mouth. It's energy. It's
Mhm.
you know, it's the skill involved in riding, and you know, it's my happy place.
Mm.
Well, like along those lines, and I'm so glad you brought up the like nonverbal relationship with the horse is, you know, from what I understand, which is limited, you know, the reason horses are used in equine therapy is because
Mm.
they're highly sensitive and really intuitive. And like you mentioned, they're very sensitive to energy.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think, again, from my limited understanding, there has to be a lot of trust between the horse and the rider,
Yeah.
especially in what you're doing, you know, like jumping and there, you know, it's not just a walk in the woods.
Sure.
There's a lot of, you know, breath
Mhm.
and timing. So how does that, if at all, correlate to how well you're able to, you know, capture other people's voices, write memoirs, collaborate? I mean, you have collaborated on more books than you haven't, if I'm
Yeah.
right. So, you know,
Oh, it's
Greg
almost
and I,
time, but yes, almost.
but significant number of books you've co-written with lots of different kinds of authors and subjects. So is there a connection there, do you think, that your ability to kind of connect with your
Yeah.
horses?
Yeah. Go figure that a podcast from two writers would have the best questions. You guys are on it with the questions. I love it. Yes, I think the key to horses and the key to collaborating with people on their books, many of which are deeply personal, I think it's authenticity. I think it is showing up as who you are, feeling your feelings, expressing those feelings. You know, with a horse, it's often holding back on certain feelings and letting others in. You know, if I'm cantering down to a big oxer, to a big jump in the ring, and I'm nervous, I have to tell myself that I'm not, so that my body doesn't act nervous, so that I don't tell the horse that I'm nervous, so the horse doesn't go, well, maybe we should just stop here and you can go over the jump and I'll stay on this side safely. So there's a lot of controlling of the emotions, but with horses. But I think with people, you know, I only take on projects that are going to be books that I think are going to do some good in the world. And so I approach my collaborators with authentic enthusiasm and excitement and passion, depending on the, you know, the subject. And so I think that that builds trust with just being open with your emotions. And, you know, not telling people what they want to hear so much as being yourself and showing real, authentic enthusiasm and belief in projects.
Mm. Well, that gets me curious to build off that a little bit as well. I mean, so much of what you're talking about with that kind of non-verbal communication with the horse is so energy based. And I wonder now, when you're going in with a collaborator, co-writer, a subject that you're ghostwriting for, how much you go in with that sort of like energy as sort of like the way you're kind of like leading into that project, or the way you're gauging your creative partner.
Yeah, I think in the beginning, it's actually similar to horses. You know, you walk into a barn and you take a deep breath, you leave the world behind, you know, and you want to bring a calm energy to the project, to the horse to begin with. I think it's the same thing with a project. You know, if I'm on a call with a potential collaborator and we want to see if we're a good fit, I try to do the same thing of just coming into it totally clean slated. You know, really listening. It sometimes catches me off guard when they have questions for me on like an early opening call, trying to decide if we're going to work together, because I go into these calls like I just want to take it all in, you know, see if we connect, see how we connect. I might have gotten a little lost on the question. I hope that answered what you were looking for.
Yeah.
No, beautifully. I want to go back a little bit to something you said that really resonated for me, because this is where you and I have a lot of parallels in our kind of post corporate media jobs. Is we are both, you know, writing our own stuff, but also ghostwriting, as mentioned, co-writing, and you talked about, the kind of feedback, like I wouldn't want to not have my name on a book, and I have found that myself, that people are kind of like, well, why aren't you just writing your own stuff? And I felt a certain way about it initially, but then the thing I kept coming back to is there has been such a freedom for me in just sitting down and working on a project with or for someone else that has combated the imposter syndrome that I feel when I'm working on my own stuff. I also find that, like, I think this is probably my people pleasing. I like to make other people happy more than myself sometimes. So that translates well when I'm writing, ghostwriting for people.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering for you, has that been like a gradual reframe also? Or was there ever a point that you felt like, this is just kind of what I got to do to pay the bills, but I'd really love to just be writing full time all the time?
Yeah. I used to always think of ghostwriting as, I really enjoy it. I love any kind of writing, but this is what I'm doing for now. And one day I'll be, real author with a capital R and only write my own books. And now being at the point where I think I'm about 10 and 10 titles of my own and 10 titles that I've co-written, I think it would be too exhausting to just be a capital R real author. I don't think I would love it as much if I lived every day in and out, pulling stories from my head and, working with edits on the page, and it's all me. It's all from my brain. There's something so refreshing about working on someone else's story. That's why I freelance edit as well. Good writers are good readers. And in addition to reading for pleasure, collaborating on a project is a type of reading. And so I think the mix is healthy. I think it's like in your own head stuff versus out of your own head. And now I think I'll always do both, not just to pay the bills, but because it feels like a healthy balance to me.
Yeah.
I would love to talk about one of your titles, children's title, Fiona and the Peculiar Praise. And I think that I'm always fascinated to talk to authors who write children's books, because I think that there's a perception maybe that it's an easy thing to pull off, and I think it's quite the opposite. I think that children are very, very savvy readers, and you have to be very, very good. If I can try and summarize, and please correct me, the sort of the overall, maybe, I don't know if you would call it the moral of the story, but it's the idea is sort of prizing courage and resourcefulness over physical appearance and sort of outward appearance and things like that. And I think if you look at the world we live in, I think that there are so many parallels to that we face. And I wonder, when you're trying to kind of take a message that you think is an important message and distill it into something for children to be able to kind of process and sit with, what is that process like?
Yeah. Children are absolutely the toughest critics, tougher than romance, I would even say, because they don't care about hurting your feelings. It's funny when I do author school visits and, they tell me exactly what they think, even if, I call on them for something else in my presentation. They're like, I didn't like that in the story. And I'm like, thank you for telling me. You should write your own story.
Right.
But to answer your question, absolutely, writing a picture book is one of the hardest things you can do, because you have maybe 500 words.
Right.
So not only does every one of them need to count, but you need to cater them to the reader, who's actually just a listener, most likely a kid who isn't reading themselves yet due to their age, and the parent who is reading it aloud, possibly many times over, is actually buying the book. So you have two very separate audiences. So when it comes to lessons or morals in a picture book, it has to be something that the parent wants to instill, of course, and you have to gift wrap it and package it so cleverly that the child does not feel like they're being preached to. The most passes I have had on picture books, it's because the writing is too didactic, or it's too on the nose, or it's too lesson based. So I knew for a long time I wanted to write about children, particularly girls' appearance being praised over all else, to the point that I think girls grow up in our society thinking that that's where their value is. You know, so that's something I learned having little girls myself. And so I wrote the book 3 different ways with a human character before I finally went, wait, no, 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 no. It's a cat. And it's a funny story.
Right.
And it's not about a human, and I got to hide the lesson and just make it something funny and fun. And the lesson will seep in, but that's not the point. Maybe that's the point for the adult book buyer, but that is not the point for the child reader who is listening. They just want to have fun. And it's a big responsibility writing a picture book, because you're hopefully turning a little person into a reader.
Yeah.
So you're not going to do that with a lesson. You're going to do that by making it, you know, a fun story.
I have to also kind of think that taking that, speaking of sort of applying different skill sets to different genres, I have to think that doing that well also makes you probably a better writer for adult fiction, in that, you know, you it's sort of the same principle, right? You don't want to be too on the nose. You don't want to feel like you're like, you don't want the reader to feel like they're being taught, you know, talked down to or taught a lesson to. And so that probably gives you a really good framework for being able to kind of, you know, camouflage that lesson or massage that lesson into a compelling story for adults as well.
Yeah. I hope so. I mean, hopefully in a year or two, everyone will find out.
Right.
but yeah, no, I think that that's helpful. I think I will never overwrite, because of all my years at People and all the time I've spent on picture books. I actually kind of have a little bit of the opposite problem. Is, you know, I look at word count ranges and I'm always on the low end of things. So I'm learning where I can stretch my legs a little, because I have spent so long packaging my writing into small spaces.
Right.
Well, and that goes back to, you know, the scene versus summary, because I think if you are a really economical writer, which also Greg is, I mean, in our balance, I am the overwriter, and I hate to say underwriter, you know, I mean that.
No, I'll take that.
I like economical. That's a good word for it.
But, you know, but like when we get our edits back on our shared books, you know, my edits are always like, you can cut some of this, and Greg's are like, you can, you know, expand on this. But I think it's really interesting because, you know, if you are, you know, if you tend to the lower side on word counts, and you're, of course, you're coming out of like magazine publishing where everything has to be so succinct and pithy, you know, it makes perfect sense to me that like that is a muscle you have to work. But then, you know, you're then confronted with the conventions of, as you mentioned, picture books or middle grade. Like everything has different rules. I mean, I believe that a good story follows the basic tenets of a good story across genres. But, you know, you mentioned tropes in romance versus another, and I'm sure that applies to middle grade and to, I know this from publishing, narrative nonfiction versus prescriptive nonfiction, and so on and so forth. But I would love to go back a little bit, because Greg, I'm so glad you brought this up, because like Head and Shoulders, the thing I hear the most when I'm like out in the world and someone finds out that I'm a writer or that I worked in publishing, they're like, I have a children's book pitch. Like
always.
this happens all the time. And I know this happens to all of our listeners. And I always feel like a dickhead, because I'm like, it's not easy. It's like one of the hardest things to get published. And then also people feel really crestfallen when I tell them that you don't get to illustrate your own books unless you're like 1% of the, you know.
Not only that, you have to leave room for the illustrator to do their telling of the story.
Right. And you don't, and in most cases, maybe this has changed, Rennie, but when I was in the game, like you didn't even get to pick. The publisher would match you with an illustrator. And that's also a whole process. So has that been your experience, that publishing into children's and, you know, picture and middle grade was more challenging than you expected? How was that road longer? You mentioned a couple of passes, which I think is really par for the course.
Sure. Yeah, I think the dual audience thing that I talked about before with the parents and the kids is a huge element to get used to. And leaving room for the illustrator to do some of the storytelling. I think that when you want to write a picture book, you think of it as writing a very short story. But if that were the case, it wouldn't be a picture book, right? It would just be a very small book of words. And so, you know, reframing how you tell a story with words versus what's going to be on the page, a particular challenge when you don't know what's going to be on the page.
Right.
I mean, I have 2 picture books that are out in the world. One of them I didn't know anything about who the illustrator would be. I wasn't part of the process. I just got proofs one day. On Fiona, that was a bit of a smaller press for you to be. They're part of Loyola Press. And I feel so lucky that my editor wanted me to go line by line in my manuscript and say, what do you see happening on each page? Which at first, talk about imposter syndrome, I was like, I have no idea. I'm not supposed to do this part.
Right.
But I very quickly realized what a gift to be able to share what I was thinking, and to see the illustrator take those ideas and bring them to life in a medium that I could never do myself. So I think picture books are the hardest, and I get people too. I mean, probably on a weekly basis. Oh, you have to hear my idea for the book. Lay it on me. Let me tell you why it won't work. No, sometimes they work.
Right.
But I actually recently had, I do editing and consulting with authors, and I had someone come to me with a 3-book picture book series that they wanted to do. And he kept repeating himself and saying, and, I mean, you could do this in your sleep, right? Like, this is going to take me a weekend to write. And he kept really just minimizing it and poo-pooing the process. And I didn't end up working with him because he just didn't get it. Yes, there are a lot of books out there, picture books that somebody wrote in a weekend. I don't mean there's picture books out there, but lots of people will put together a children's story very quickly without a lot of thought, without a lot of heart. It's for kids, whatever. I would love to know how many kids actually enjoy that story. I doubt that they do. I mean, it is just, it's the most behind the scenes labor for something that looks easy. It's like professional sports, right? When they make it look easy, it's because they have practiced and honed and honed and honed. We talked about the practice stories before in fiction. With picture books, oh my God, I have dozens that never went anywhere because I could never figure out, how to make it a compelling story, how to make it funny, or how to let the illustrator do their job. Dozens that are just not quite it. So while they are very short, they are certainly the hardest in some ways.
Yeah.
Right. And that's from like the writing perspective and the creating perspective. And then the other side, and I've thought about this a lot since I've become a mom, and most of our disposable income goes to children's books, that 90% of the children's books that we've got for my son are books that my husband and I read growing up. And when you go to a bookstore, a children's bookstore, a bookstore section, the new books have to compete with the 50 years of Dr. Seuss and Shel Silverstein and Maurice Sendak and all of the classics that we read growing up. So it's like limited space upon selectiveness. And there's been, I think, this like proliferation of celebrity written children's books.
Absolutely.
And I get that. I understand why publishers would do that.
Good bet. Yeah.
And the adults are like, oh, Matthew McConaughey wrote one, Jimmy Fallon wrote one. Sure, why not? But I think that the staying power of children's books that like, going back to your point, that fulfill like the parents' need and the kids is such a hard needle to thread. And I find that the really clever ones, like Go the F to Sleep or The Day the Crayons Quit, which I think are so great. My son's kind of like, me.
I know. I disagree with my kids. They're more middle grade, but we have picture books disagreements all the time in my house.
Sorry, there was no question there. I just wanted to get on my soapbox.
No, it's a great point. And, for the business side of things, I tell authors I work with all the time, you have to forget about the classics that you grew up with, because that's not where publishing is now. I mean, that's true of every genre, but I think that also speaks to why everyone thinks that they can write a children's book, because, the ones we treasure, you hear them over and over. I remember being a kid and there would be certain lines from books that I would like say to myself.
Mm.
And so it's close to your heart in a different way when it's a book that was, read to you as a child. And you're right about the competition and the shrinking space. It's the trickiest of all the categories I've worked in so far.
Mm.
I'm curious, as this conversation is progressing, I knew going in that I had in mind that you had collaborated, from an authorial standpoint, but I'm realizing as you talk, not only have you done that, not only are you a co-writer, you're also sort of a co-storyteller because you are working with illustrators. And then the fact that you're so interactive when you're going to schools to kind of read to kids and get the feedback, that's almost like another collaboration unto itself with these groups of kind of readers. And I just wonder if you can, this is sort of a general question, but I wonder if maybe like what some of your takeaways have been of having really a really big chunk of your sort of creative life be very, very collaborative and very sort of complementary or kind of, circular in that way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I have for most of my adult life considered myself an introvert, somewhat of a homebody.
Okay.
The energy spent with a creative process to me is very, very different than the energy spent in social settings. So I feel like I probably use it up creatively. And that's why, when it comes time to do the small talk with the other parents, like sometimes I physically can't do it. There's nothing left.
Yeah.
But I'm like, I work at home all day. Why do I not have a battery for this? But you're right. It's because there's so much collaborating that I use it up that way. It's my favorite way to use my social energy, is to put it into something creative.
Yeah.
But then there's nothing left for anybody else. And, I just want to get into my bed with a book or Netflix and, not leave for 3 days.
Is that sort of your battery recharge is, quiet time, maybe taking in, reading, watching, that kind of thing?
Yeah. For me, with reading for pleasure, it really it comes in spurts. I review books on a freelance basis for People magazine.
Right.
So I've gotten to the point now that by page 50, I know if we do it as a service to readers, so we don't ever write bad reviews. But I know by page 50 if I'm going to continue to like it enough to review it, or if it's going to be a did not finish.
Yep.
I got totally lost in my own story there. So reading for pleasure. So a book has to grab me right away. 50 pages is a stretch. I do that for a review. Personally, it's more like 30. If it grabs me right away, I can't put it down. And I'm a bit of an absentee parent. And I think maybe that's why I like thrillers so much, because I think a good thriller almost always grabs right away. It isn't usually a slow burn in terms of capturing the reader. So I'm just going to close my window here. Sorry.
Sure.
Elementary school just let out.
Gotcha. Okay.
So it's either like a binging situation with books, or if I can't get into a book and I've been reading all day for work and there's nothing left for me, it's documentaries, or it's something really trashy on Netflix. The Selling Sunsets, the Love Is Blinds. It's not turning my brain off like I can on a horse, but it's close. It's in the same neighborhood.
Okay.
Yeah. I find it's like, fast food for my creative brain.
I love that. Yeah.
So, I'm totally with you. And also, I just want to add that in addition to all of the books you're writing and being an introvert, you're the mother of 2 children. And that is such a brain drain and literally changes your brain chemistry when you grow them and birth them and then parent them. And I'm wondering, for the good and the difficult, how has becoming a mom changed you and changed your craft and your routine? Because when you and I met, we were living the city life, unmarried, child-free, had loads of free time.
Right, exactly. I think to go from loads of free time to almost none, you really maximize what you're doing while you're doing it. So I'm not always successful at this, but I try really hard to put the phone away completely when I'm with my kids and just to be with them. And, for me, like the sweetest moments are often the simplest. It's not the Disney trips, although I love those too. It's the little moments together, waiting for school drop off or, making the lunches, stuff like that. So I try to make the most of that. My time with my horses, like what a privilege. I try to make the most of that. But what has changed with work is making the most of an hour to sit down and write, which seems like nothing, and it can actually be everything now, because every hour, every pocket of time has to be maximized, or I'm just going to go through my day half-assing everything,
Sure.
Yeah.
Do you find, because you are often, working on several projects, sometimes, simultaneously, is your creative brain always sort of on the thing you're working on? Are there like patches of something else floating in sometimes, unexpectedly? How are you able to kind of like keep the plate spinning in that sense?
Yeah, not well. No, it's always a little bit of everything. I even recently got into helping friends with older kids with their college essays.
Oh, wow.
I find there's a huge parallel between ghostwriting and helping, a 17, 18-year-old find their voice for a college essay. And I'll be doing that. I'll be in a meeting and I'll be like, hold on just a second. And I got to make a note, because I'm like, oh, that's what my main character's going to do. Like it's like just being bombarded from all different, creative rivers, and it never stops. And that must be why we need the junk TV, right? Because it's like you got to stop thinking at some point. So no, it's like it's all on all the time. Maybe that's why it's easy to switch from project to project, because nothing ever really gets turned off.
That makes sense. Yeah.
That reminds me, like a long time ago, I was in a publishing meeting with a prospective client, prospective author who is a famous psychic whose name I don't want to mention because they may have sullied their reputation. But I remember when this famous psychic was kind of doing a reading of people in the room, it was really incredible. And then they were talking about like how they were getting their downloads, and they were constantly hearing and feeling like, and hearing voices, seeing things, having flashes. And I thought then, and it reminded me now, that this is not dissimilar to how I feel as a writer and a creative person, that we're constantly, all of our senses are being bombarded, so funny to tie this back to the ADHD handbook, but I think that there is a relational thing here where creative people and focus and getting all of these different ideas and feelings and sensory downloads, maybe it's like being a psychic. Maybe it's also like having attention deficit disorder, even if you don't officially have it. But having worked on that book, are there any kind of like tricks or wisdom that you've gleaned for people, both who have ADHD or are just creatives or psychics who are getting, how do you recommend like focusing and maybe drowning out all of the noise?
Yeah. I mean, it's not a very sexy answer, but oftentimes it's setting an alarm and saying, I'm going to do this now. I'm going to email, my texts, and sometimes if all of the departed souls are talking to me at the same time, sometimes it's like, I know I can't keep my focus on this one thing for very long, but for 20 minutes I'm not allowed to do anything else. So for me, it's a lot of policing myself. And it's interesting, in the ADHD book, they talk about anecdotally how people with ADHD are often very creative because they don't have as much control over, the input and everything flowing in. And also it's called attention deficit, but sometimes it's quite the opposite, with the hyper focus happen with folks with ADHD. And so if they can get into a state like that, I can only imagine the creativity and the word count that could come out,
Mhm.
So no, honestly, no tips except that I pick a lane sometimes and I just have to self-police and not let myself do anything else. And like I said, also about the author, Kate McKeon, learning to bring the laptop everywhere and to be able to write in any setting, no matter what else is going on, no matter if I'm comfortable or not, no matter where I have to prop up the computer, just having it be kind of like an appendage as opposed to, you hear a lot about writing rituals and having a place that you write. If you do this for a living, I think you got to have more flexibility than that.
Right, right.
Mm.
Yeah. Well, we are inexplicably we are toward the end of our
I
time
know.
together. It has flown by. But
Fun.
while we mentioned a number of projects today, and we know you have a few that are kind of coming out. Could you, with the last few minutes, just sort of give our listeners a taste of what they can be expecting from you?
Yeah. So Fiona and the Peculiar Praise is, of course, the picture book that's out now. And when you were talking about the title, by the way, just to go back, I was curious if you were going to ask me why I didn't go for the alliteration there. And
Mhm.
the story there is I did. The cat used to be Penelope. It was Penelope and the Peculiar
Ah,
Praise.
okay.
Oh.
But there was another author at the imprint who had an alliteration with P's in the title.
Ah,
And so they asked me if I'd be willing to make a change, and I didn't have to, and I did. Anyway, so
Well, we're
Fiona,
all big fans of the name Fiona at Imposter
we
Hour.
are as well. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
right. Yeah, and I actually think it has a better ring to it anyway, so it was a happy, accident.
Yeah.
So Fiona is available wherever books are sold. I'm so proud of the ADHD Field Guide for Adults. I wrote that with Kate Osborne and Eric Good. Funny enough, Liz, you referred to it as a more serious book, and I actually have to say that it's the way they did it. It's anything but serious. It is
Oh, good.
reverent. It is illustrated, and it was designed and put together with the neurodivergent brain in mind. It does not have to be read cover to cover. There are no big chunks of text. You can flip to any page, and there is a nugget of helpful information. And I think the thing I'm most proud of with that book, it comes out March 3rd, is that it really works hard to de-shame the reader, because shame is a huge part of being neurodivergent and having ADHD. And the authors just put so much into it to show readers that they're not alone. This is how our brains work. Here are some things that have made our lives easier. They pulled their readers, and there are dozens of readers who have written in and are part of the book with things that work for them and ways to relate. And it's so special. So anyone who has ADHD, diagnosed as an adult, knows someone with ADHD, I think that book is going to be a real game changer. So I'm very proud of that.
And that's available for pre-order right now, right?
Available for pre-order. Yep. The
Excellent.
ADHD Field Guide for Adults, and March 3rd is the pub date.
Okay.
Awesome.
We are also excited about, I know it's very early on, but we are excited for what you whip up on the romance side as well.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
listeners,
That is
keep your eyes out for that.
Thank you. That is set, unsurprisingly, in the equestrian world.
Okay.
It'll be under a pen name. I don't really know how you write spicy romance and picture books, so I'm not. So someone else is writing that book, but I'll fill you in on the details when that comes together.
Yay. Oh, well,
Right.
Rennie, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to have you here today. So great to see you. Where can listeners find you on social media and out in the world?
Yeah, I am mostly Instagram at Rennie Dyball, and that is my website as well. And yeah, happy to hear from your listeners and readers anytime.
All right.
Right. And also just to reiterate that Rennie is an editor and a co-writer and a consultant and a coach. So lots of resources if you are looking for help in that field.
Absolutely. All right. And I will take us out. Imposter Hour with Liz and Greg is created and hosted by us, Elizabeth Keenan and Greg Wands. The show is produced and edited by Bookwild Collective founder Kate Herget. Scott Leeds composed our original theme music, and Steve Luoma designed our logo.
And you can find us on Instagram at Imposter Hour Podcast and online at imposterhour.com. Thanks for listening.